Hello all, we are going to go ahead and get started on our next session. I am Barb Tassel, and I've been a member of this planning committee, and I'm a very long-time QSEnista, long time in like 6 years, some of you that's short time. I believe in this model because it makes sense because the competencies are at the individual level, and so that's kind of kept me tagged into the importance of this work. And each year at the QSEn conference, we highlight a patient story. This year we have one of our very own QSEnistas, Dr. Carol Durham, to share her experience as a patient in our healthcare system. Dr. Carol Flower Durham is Professor and Director of Education, Innovation, Simulation, Learning Environment at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill School of Nursing, the heart of the QSEn movement and now a regional center. She is the immediate past president of the International Nursing Association for Clinical Simulation and Learning. She has received many awards for her excellence in teaching in both nursing and interprofessional education. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carol Durham.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Been a part of the QSEn team from the beginning, and then who would know, I ended up with a patient story. So in fact, we probably all will end up with patient stories at some point in time, if you haven't already. So I would like for us to take the opportunity to look at some teams and some noticing. So we're going to watch this quick little clip and just notice what you notice about this.
Smarter to travel in groups.
So when we look at those three clips, I'd like for you to reflect back to when you saw the penguins. They're on a journey. Somebody's looking forward, and the others are kind of just enjoying the scenery, and all of a sudden somebody notices that there's danger approaching. And so they signal by a little sound. And the thing that was important is everybody in the team knew what to do. We didn't then have to tell people what to do, right? The penguins did what they did, and they averted the adverse event. So then when we move to the ants, one ant gets in trouble, calls for help, and the leader is very busy doing the leading, trying to get everybody in the right place. He hears the call for help, he changes the plan immediately, and then everybody goes into action, again, not having to be instructed, but knowing, and they do it, and they avert an adverse event. And then the last one, you might notice it was the smallest of the crabs. He saw this overshadowing, ominous thing getting ready to happen, and he looks up and he sees the seagull, and then he actually signals, and everybody gets in formation, and they prevent being eaten by the seagull. So when you think about it, noticing is very important. So let's reflect back on the beginning of QSEn. We've already had some reflection with Jane Barnstetter, and so today I'm thinking back to what really kind of was the impetus to start this work was the 2003 looking at this Committee on Healthcare Professionals, and it talks about all health professionals should be educated to deliver patient-centered care as members of an interdisciplinary team, and now we talk about that interprofessionally, emphasizing evidence-based practice, quality improvement approaches, and informatics. And then QSEn added the safety competency as well. So we've come a long way, and we have a long way yet to go. So just in the context of what I'm going to talk about, I'd like to talk to you about how hazardous is healthcare. So we know that airlines and railroads and nuclear power plants are considered ultra safe. Isn't that interesting that they would be considered ultra safe? And we're glad that they are. And driving gets to be a little bit more risky. It's regulated, but sometimes we choose to go faster than speed limits and other things, so it becomes a little bit more hazardous. But the thing that's really interesting is healthcare is the most risky of things, and this comes from Lucian Leape's work, and it's as dangerous as mountain climbing and bungee jumping. So in 1999, 2000, we heard the report that 45 to 98,000 people died from preventable harm, and we called it medical errors. I'm on a mission to change that to healthcare errors, because when the public hears the word medical, they really think about it being our colleagues in medicine, but in actuality, it belongs to all of us. So now, John James, after an adverse event with his own son, re-examined that data and other data, and he has found that up to 400,000, he believes it's probably more, people die from preventable healthcare errors. I have an incredible time with numbers, and so it's really helpful for me to be visual. In Arlington Cemetery, the national cemetery for the U.S., holds 400,000 graves. So when you think about that, 400,000 graves are filled every year. In essence, we fill Arlington Cemetery every year with preventable harm. That is not acceptable. Noticing. Noticing is integral to the everyday practice of nursing. It is the precursor for our clinical reasoning. It informs our judgment, and it's really the basis of our care. By noticing, the nurse can be preemptive with the possible risk and support subtle changes towards recovery. We do noticing every day, all day long. It's a natural act. We notice the weather, the price of gas, the sound of a lawnmower. It involves all 5 of our senses. We're exposed to a vast amount of stimuli, too much to absorb, and we cannot notice all the stimuli around us. That's just in the natural world, but how much more so in the healthcare system? What we notice, what really captures our attention, is selective. And often we notice that which has the most relevance to us. So we'll notice the weather this week if we're going to have a picnic on Friday. We notice the things that really matter. So Tanner actually has used noticing in her model of clinical judgment, and in this, it's actually the very first stage of her model. Noticing is a prerequisite to nursing action. So, how do we help our learners to go from noticing to doing? We have to do that in training. We have to do it with patterns and meeting and have them recognize what are patterns and know what they are. We have to also ask them to always be thinking, what's the worst it can be? So that they know to be looking for what is not obvious yet to them. And also avoid anchoring and premature closure and confirmation bias. And I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about that as an example in a case. Another thing that keeps us from noticing, I think, is fatigue and distractions. So if we think about working 12 hours, let's say you're at the end of your third 12-hour shift, how much energy and cognitive ability do you have to notice? And I think that that is contributing to some of these errors that are occurring. And the issue that I have is we went to this because we thought it was a better staffing pattern. How do we go back? How do we go back? Because we have evidence, as Jane Barnstein even alluded to as well, that 12-hour staffing is not the thing that we need to be doing because it's putting patients at risk. Good nurses can't notice when they're exhausted, much less do anything about it. We also have to give learners a voice and able to speak up when it's time to speak up. We have to help them to know communication, collaboration, and teamwork. We have to teach them Team Stout's 2-challenge rule. We have to teach them the cuss words from Team Stout's. So as an example of this, I'd like for you to take the piece of gum that you have, and if you've already chewed it, somebody else will give you another piece. But if you would actually break it into 3 equal pieces, then turn to somebody close to you and get a quality judgment about, are they equal pieces? So what do you think? How many people feel like their pieces are in equal pieces? Raise your hand. So there's a few people. How many people think it's good enough if I'm going to share a piece of gum? Okay. So I'm curious, how many people took it out of the paper to break it? How many people left it in the paper? Curious. Anybody in the room did it horizontal? Engineers often do. Yes, okay. Occasionally we get someone who does that. So, but the point is, we'll come back to this, but when we're dividing gum, we got it into 3 equal pieces. That's close enough. That's good enough. But my question to you is good enough? Well, 99.9% on a return on your investment would be outstanding. Dancing in the street, getting ready to retire. If you have a return on your response rate for your survey, you would be ecstatic. Whoever gets 99.9%. But I'm asking you, where does healthcare fall in this ability to regarding 99.9% standard of excellence? So I'd like for us to watch a 3.5-minute quick video to kind of give us a perspective about that. So we don't have the sound, Christian. So it was the top one that needed to be played that had the narration. Pardon for a second. He's been awesome. If you're interested in using those little clips that I just showed you, they're called if you Google Take the Bus, you will get them. And so the idea is that we're safer traveling in groups was the idea from that video clip, which it demonstrated that quite nicely.
It's not enough that we do our best. Sometimes we have to do what is required. Sometimes good enough is anything but. If 99.9% is good enough, 470 entries in the New Merriam-Webster Dictionary will be misspelled. If 99.9% is good enough, in the next 60 seconds, 806 phone calls will be misrouted. In the next 2 minutes, 1,902 people will consume a meal that leads to a foodborne illness. Tomorrow morning, 2,052 Wall Street journals will be missing the front page. In the next hour, more than 1,000 ATM machines will dispense the wrong amount of cash. In the next 24 hours, 583,561 pieces of mail will be mishandled by the post office. In the next week, 21,367 books will be published with the wrong cover. The following week, 80,768 shoes will be shipped in mismatched pairs. If 99.9% is good enough, next week, 44,230 medical prescriptions will be written incorrectly. By the end of next year, 573 coronary bypass surgeries will have failed. By the end of the year, 4,266 newborns will leave the hospital with the wrong parents. If 99.9% is good enough, this year, more than 200,000 tax returns will be lost by the IRS. By the end of the month, 25,000 brand new tires will be purchased with dangerous defects. By the end of tomorrow, 174 airline flights will not have landed safely. Good is not good where better is required. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit.
What stands out for you about this video? Just turn to someone and say something about what stood out for you. So can I have someone with a loud voice give me a few examples of what you said? So what's an example of what stood out to you?
It's not good enough.
It's not good enough. Anything else? We have a lot of work to do. Consequences. The numbers are striking.
It's not acceptable in these situations, so it's definitely not acceptable in healthcare.
In a life and death situation. Our patients come to us, and we come to you to trust that you will do the right thing, that you don't do what's good enough, that you actually do excellence. So when you go to the hospital, you're not expecting people to be able to perform as we expect our students to perform at an 84% passing rate for giving medications. We're like, last time I did this urinary catheterization, I got an 84%, so hopefully you're in that 84%. So our patients expect excellence. We have to reevaluate the way that we're telling our students that it's okay to make 16% medication errors by saying that 84% isn't good enough passing rate. So I think we have to rethink the way that we're positioning what we're talking about in healthcare for excellence. My concern is that oftentimes we will use the mantra, we're human and thus errors happen, as a way to dismiss our challenge to get to excellence. This video was about two different percentages, 99.9% or the 0.1%. But really, it's not about the two different percentages. It's not even about two different perspectives. It's rather about two different groups of people, those in the 99.9% and the 0.1%. Good enough, is it really? So the concept of good enough is at the heart of mediocrity. One of the things I never put together in the name of a nurse is mediocrity. Nursing is not mediocre. We strive for excellence. We care about making a difference, and we do. But software programs release known defects. Food products are shipped with acceptable foreign matter in them. Toys are manufactured with an eye on profit instead of patient safety or children's safety. Are we settling for good enough in healthcare in this mantra of we're human, we make mistakes? 0.1% is only insignificant when you're not affected by it yourself or someone that you know and love. So we need to use story to develop QSEn competencies. It puts a face to healthcare, and it can create a sense of urgency to do something differently. It applies the knowledge and experience to real-life situations. It's situated cognition, and it ties actions to outcomes. It's memorable. So I'm going to talk about a few stories. I'm going to do this quickly, but if you want to know more about these stories, they're in the slide deck so that you can go and read more about them. But Sue Sheridan is on the Team Steps videos that are free, and she talks about the loss of 2 of her beloved family members. So it starts out in the way that Cal, her son, was born, and he began to have bilirubin issues, so he was jaundiced. And he was sent home from the hospital, and they said, put the baby in the sun, for so many hours, and he'll get better. So she calls back and he says, he's more yellow, he's lethargic, things are not going well. Honey, is this your first baby? Babies get yellow. And so we think often that healthcare errors occur in the hospital, but they occur in primary care as well. So the long and short of it is Cal finally got to the hospital because he was unresponsive. His bilirubin was so high that he lives now with cerebral palsy, and he has severe, she has the loss of the perfect child because no one would listen to her. And so then Patrick, her husband, had headaches. He went in to be examined, and they found he had a brain tumor. So they removed it, and they said, things look good. It doesn't look like it's cancerous, but we've sent it off just to be certain. So the report came back, and it got filed before anybody called him. So he goes along thinking that it was benign because he didn't hear anything. And so 6 months later, when the headaches returned, they examined him and found that he had metastatic brain cancer and that he had only 6 months to live. And so the filing of that report is an issue that occurred, and she lost her husband because we weren't paying attention to quality in what was happening. So if you think about the QSEn companies, patient-centered care would have allowed Sue to be listened to, and when she was saying something's wrong with my baby, I need you to hear me, or quality improvement would say we don't file a document until the doctor signs off and we know the protocol of what's the follow-up for this adverse report that we got. So quality improvement needs to be done throughout our healthcare system, including our clinics and hospital, in our doctor's offices. So the next story, many of you are familiar with. Sorrel King is an amazing talker about her daughter, Josie. She's the child on the bottom of the rung there. And we know her story, and the thing that I think is important is to notice is that Josie began to show signs and symptoms of something not being quite right. When she was being bathed, she would take the washcloth and suck on it desperately. She would try to get everybody's cup. She was very thirsty. She had a PICC line, it was pulled, she was a little bit lethargic, they were giving her medication, methadone, and the nurse comes in at 1 o'clock and says, it's time for the methadone. Sorrel said, I've talked to the doctor, we've decided to stop it. And the nurse said, it's ordered, I'm giving it. So the nurse pushes that methadone, and out of the eye of Josie, this crocodile tear rose down her eye, and it's the first time that Sorrel says she ever cried in the hospital, and what ended up happening is she arrested and she had died. The rest of the kids on this ladder were preparing a homecoming party for her with balloons and posters, but instead they had to revert to preparing for a funeral because people did not notice that she was septic and that she was dehydrated and that she had low urinary output and that she was lethargic. So when that methadone was given, it overwhelmed that 18-month-old body and she died. So a nurse, a physician, anybody could have noticed that something was different about this baby. And we need to raise an alarm, so just like the penguins got help before something catastrophic happened, we need to be able to do that more so ever for our patients. So if you go back and think about the quality and safety, if safety had been, the risk of harm had been examined, and the nurse had said, okay, if you don't think we should give it, and I'm looking at the patient and she's not restless or in pain, maybe I can stop and go and check on this before I give this drug, and we can better examine what needs to be done. So noticing is not enough, but noticing and using your expertise to know what to do is what really matters, and that's what will save a patient. So I think we get focused on teaching so much about the what and the how, but we don't take them to the next level. What do I do with all of this? And it's the noticing of that. So informatics would have really helped if they had been able to look at the technology and see the communication of this drug had been discontinued. So then we look at Lewis Blackman. Lewis Blackman we use all the time in our school in our interprofessional course. And you know Helen Haskell, she's on the QSEn website. But Lewis's story has a few points of noticing that I want to bring forward. And this video is available on YouTube streaming if you want to use it in your classes. But he came in for elective surgery, pediatric excavatum. He's 15 years old. He had only comorbidity was asthma, and so he had epidural analgesic, ketorolac, given to him for pain management. When he got discharged, he had a low urinary output in the recovery room, and they didn't have a bed on the surgery, pediatric surgery, so they put him on pediatric oncology. And then, so days go by, and on day 4, he has a sudden onset of abdominal pain. And we know, and we need to make sure our learners and providers understand sudden onset or sudden stopping of a pain is bad. And so, and he couldn't drink, and this is day 4 of a healthy kid with a pectus excavatum surgery. And so they anchored on the idea that it was constipation and gas, and that's what they believed it was. A nurse in the night was alarmed, and she's like, this is not making sense to me. She noticed it was not making sense. So she goes out of the room, and the next thing Helen says, she comes back, and she says, it's constipation and gas. We just need to get him up and walk. He couldn't walk. So the idea is that what happened outside that room? She ran into someone, a nurse or somebody else, who said, honey, we've been dealing with this all 4 days. 4 days? You can say you've been dealing with pain and constipation and nothing has changed. So, but it's what it is, so don't worry about it. Instead of laying your stethoscope on the abdomen and looking at it and looking at the clinical signs of noticing what was there, she knew something was wrong, but she didn't have the voice to say, stop the line, we need to do something different. So what this whole idea of us premature closing is something that our colleagues in medicine use all the time. But I think it's something we need to adopt in nursing, that we have at least 3 possibilities of what's going on here before we stop and anchor down on one. And then we have to be sure that we're careful not to exclude what the real reason is. So if there were power gradients, there are power gradients everywhere we work. It is not good or bad, it is. And we need to know how to work in them. And so if you have the knowledge but not the confidence to report what you know, then you need to get the confidence that because you're in nursing because you care about the patient. You don't care about trying to please some other person. It is about the patient. It's important to overcome our hesitancy, include all the team members into discussion, and I'm going to talk more about how that works. I just want to close this loop about Lewis. So Lewis on day 5 has a drop in his oxygenation to 85%, and you can see his vital signs, but at 4 a.m. the abdominal pain is severe, and a few hours later it suddenly goes away, and the intern that's in the room and he tells that to says, oh good, no, oh bad, something worse has happened. So at 8:30 a.m. that day, they cannot find a blood pressure on him. For 2 hours, they seek to find equipment that works. Instead of looking at the patient and realizing that this is his blood pressure. So they did 12 different times with 7 different blood pressures, and it was because he had no blood pressure. It was not equipment failure. So we have to stop and think about what is going on. There are serious consequences of not noticing, and more serious consequences of noticing and not failure to do what needs to be done. Sometimes the changes are subtle, and sometimes they're blatant, but we have to be willing to bring them forward. So if you think about what's going on here, McLeod in 1994 recognized the importance of noticing. She talks about the relationship to expert nursing practice. The nurse notices significant findings of a situation. She understands what the meaning of that significant finding is, and she knows how to act to intercept it on the behalf of the patient. So when we think about this, they went to the attending surgery who was in surgery and said Lewis is not doing well, but he had gotten a report that morning that Lewis was doing fine. So how can he break his concentration on the patient who's on the table to go take care of Lewis, and especially since the report he had gotten that he was fine? So what we say, what we report is very important. So the Swiss cheese model that Reason talks about lined up here for Lewis, and we're going to examine what happened. So looking at the anatomy of this premature closure in that Swiss cheese model, he was admitted to the oncology floor. So when we think about that, the context of the noticing matters in this place because he was admitted to oncology, and the doctors and the nurses are used to dealing with patients who are nauseous, irretractable pain, weak, fatigued. This did not seem out of the norm for them. So when do we know to call for help and get a surgery nurse to come down and look at a kid that I don't think is looking quite right? So then he had the low urinary output. The night nurse knew this, and you look at all the pieces that happened. What happened is he had shock and impending collapse. When they did the autopsy, there was 200 cc's of blood in his abdomen. The duodenal ulcer perforated, and 4 years before that, ketorolac had been listed as a black box. So why didn't we call pharmacy and say, I'm having trouble with this kid's pain, can you come look at it? And they would have known about ketorolac. Helen says if Lewis had been anywhere else but in a hospital, he would be alive today. If the hospital is the one place that we are not able to get him the help, the medical attention that he needed. That's a terrible legacy to have. So evidence-based practice about ketorolac, teamwork, and collaboration are evident in this case. We need to study eras, and solely studied eras, and he was able to land that plane because of that. If you're not comfortable studying your eras, you actually need to go to the ARC where they have mortality and morbidity, and you can study that there. Benner talks about creating a sense of salience, and that's what we're trying to do with this. We have to do it through deliberate practice, doing task trainers, doing simulation, doing it with teams, and doing it so that we know that we're covered, somebody's watching our back. Simulation really does lend itself to that. It creates a space for a story to occur. I have one more story I want to give you, and it's mine, and that's why I'm here today. So I had a PICC line in for an infection, and a few days Wednesday before Thanksgiving, it was pulled. I was so excited not to have that PICC line anymore. So I moved forward, and then on Monday morning, I decided it's time for me to go back to work. I've been out for two weeks. That's a long time in nursing. So I go back to work, and I'm sitting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in a room full of colleagues who love me and who are nurses. And I begin to have rigors so bad that I cannot sit in the chair. In my wisdom, I get up and leave that room of people who could help me. I am a block from the hospital, and I decide I need to drive myself 30 minutes away to my home. My colleague who works with me was so distraught that she said, you can't go home. I said, I am, and I was a bit stubborn. And she said, well, stop by the doctor's office. I did, and as I come out of the doctor's office, I had really violently ill, throwing up and diarrhea. But I didn't go back into the doctor's office and call for an ambulance. I just decided I now have to go home. So I got home, and I get cleaned up, and I sit down on the couch because I feel really bad, and I have this sense of impending doom. Wow, I had taught it, and I didn't know how you knew it was, but now I do. It washed over from the back of me. And in the washing over of the back of me, I knew something bad was getting ready to happen, and I needed help. I called my daughter to come stay with me because I was afraid I was going to die alone. And then my husband, who's an hour away, I called him and said, will you come and take me to the hospital? I could have called an ambulance, but I didn't. So he comes, and he says, just like every other layperson, so here's the thing, it's going to be really crazy. Let's eat some chicken noodle soup and go to bed, and we'll go in the morning. If I had done that, I would have died. But I knew about this sense of impending doom, and I said to him, so if I do that, I said, I think something bad is getting ready to happen. I didn't talk about all the other that. So we get to the hospital, and they put me in the emergency room, and the point is that they did not notice what was going on because it was Monday after Thanksgiving, and they were packed. And there was so much competing priorities for them. I had a high fever, I had a blood pressure that was dropping, and I had no urinary output. So they finally moved me up to the floor about the change of shift. And I get up there, and Cindy Jones is a charge nurse, and she comes in and looks at me and notices that something needs to happen here, so she calls a rapid response nurse. Janice Galloway comes and is a rapid response nurse to me, and she knocks on the door and says, hi, I'm Janice, I'm a rapid response nurse. And I went, oh, I know what that means. Oh no. And then I was like, oh good, you're here. So this nurse is the one who actually saved me. As she was the lead of the team, she was the person with the expertise, and she led the team. So the thing that I think is really important for us to recognize is that sometimes we are the leader of the team, and we need to take ownership of that leadership and do it. So my blood pressure was dropping into the 60s. She would give me 1,000 liters as protocol called for, and I would drift up to the 80s, and as soon as the fluid stopped, I would drop down. She looked at me and said, are you okay? And I knew she was asking me, are you going into failure? And I said, I'm fine. And she'd give me the next liter. So we went, I knew she had me, and talk about comfort, to know somebody who was really smart taking care of you. At the foot of the bed is the doctors, and they come in and they say, are both those IVs working? I said, yes, they are. We were not at patient-centered care at that point, so they turned back to Janice and said, do you think that we should start a central line before we get busy? And I looked at him and I said, I know what get busy means. I would love for you to do whatever you need to. I want to survive this. So the crash cart comes up outside. My husband, friends, and my son is there. My son is 22 years old at this point, and he has been reading about infections, and he said on the internet that it said that orange juice was really good for that. So I thought, oh, how sweet. And he brought me a half gallon. We could have cured the whole floor. So he pours me a bit of orange juice, and my pressure's in the 60s. And I look into the eyes of this young man, and I think this may be the last time we have a conversation, because I know the mortality rate of sepsis. I'd done a module simulation 3 months ahead. And so I said I would love orange juice. And so I took a sip, and I took a bite of his organic breakfast. And because I wanted him to know that I was trying everything to survive. So I get transferred to the unit and talk about being able to leave that bedside with that nurse who took care of me. It was really hard because I wanted her to go with me. She was my lifeline. So we need to remember that. We are handing a patient off to another lifeline, but a patient doesn't know that. And the thing that was really powerful for me is that when we did this, and I looked at the doctors at the foot of my bed and I said, so, what are you most worried about? And I teach this all the time, so I thought I'd just as well use it, right? So they looked at me conflicted because I didn't know what to do about that. And so I said, I'm a nurse and I want to know. And he said, we're afraid that you have septic, you're going into septic shock. And I went, oh gosh, me too, thank goodness we're on the same page. So the long and short of it is I'm in the 99.9% group. I am grateful to be there. And I'm there because of the quality of care that was delivered to me at UNC hospitals and the nurses that were there. The emergency room failed me, but the floor saved me. And so we have to be diligent wherever we are. But the thing that's really interesting, the more I do this, there's a sense of survival guilt, because Sorrel King's baby didn't survive. Helen Haskell's wonderful child did not survive. And all these different 400,000 people are dying every year. So after this, we know that the sepsis campaign occurred, and this was 8 years after this occurred is my event, so it's 2010 that I had my event. And so we have to always be asking what's you're most worried about, and that is what Cindy Johnson did when she got the rapid response nurse to come to my door. Thank God. I believe it was a miracle. Janice only worked on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and this was a Tuesday morning. So I was an honorary chairperson for a sepsis walk, and this walk began because Jerry Monroe was a neighbor, and he went to the hospital and 3 days later died of sepsis. So this group of people in the neighborhood decided to do something about sepsis awareness. And the following year, after that first event, they had Randy come in as some honorary chairperson, and I have a picture there with him. He lost 4 limbs to sepsis. One of the hardest questions I had to answer was when his wife came up to me, and she looked at me, and she said, what did they do for you? The other half of that question is that they didn't do for him. And I knew that was the other half of the question, and it was about the early recognition, the sense of impending doom and not ignoring it, and getting help. They had gone to get help, but they were dismissed and said, it's just the flu, go home. So in the end, the next year, I'm the honorary chairperson, but I never forget that he was survived, but he has the 4 limbs missing. We have to prepare safety workers. We have to value confidence over uncertainty. How do we help our learners ask about things? Do we shut them down? Have you ever said to a student when they said, what is this? And you said, I don't know why you don't know that. I lectured on it last week. And of course, everything I say you remember. So we have to be certain that we're not shutting down questions, because if we shut them down in school, they're not going to ask the questions in clinical practice. So we have to have them ask those questions. How do we create a culture where calling for help is not seen as a sign of weakness, but rather a sign of excellence? So here's an awesome team I'm going to show you. And this team is prepared, they are getting ready, and they know what to do. So all of a sudden, in comes the car. You will see the guy remove a nail from the place, so he's watching what is happening. So by their actions, you can see the car is coming. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, that car is out of there. It has all 4 tires changed, oils, and all that stuff has been changed. So I know that we can't get this good in healthcare, but the point is, because we're not dealing with machines, but in fact we are dealing with machines in some way. We're dealing with people who have all these different things happening. And then when they finish, they don't go, high five, wasn't that awesome? They really are just saying, wow, we did a day's job. So now, I'm gonna watch another video that didn't quite work out that way. And you'll see what's happening here is a football game, and there's a fumble. And if you watch the fumble, the guy who catches it is Parker. And if you look behind him, you'll see his goal line. But he gets to going the wrong way. In fact, he goes 58 yards the wrong way, and all the other team members are blocking for him. And the other team is not even tackling him. I mean, they tackle him finally. If they let him go, he would have scored for them. And if you see now, he will have this sense of shame, and he will drop his head that he did something that was horribly wrong. So the point, I think, is, and if you can go ahead and just go forward, Christian, is that sometimes we go with the flow, we go with the team, we don't stop and say, wait, our goal is this way. Why are we going this way? Stopping, right? So we have to keep our voices in the play. So have your people stay curious. Have them asking these things, having them be mindful and present. Every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. So we have to move from professional knowledge to systems knowledge. We have to do individual learning and go to team learning. And all the other things on the left-hand side are important, but they have to merge also to the right-hand side. We have to move from blaming to just culture. We have to go from a discipline focus to an interprofessional focus. We really do have to make a difference here. There are some patients whom we cannot help, and there are none whom we cannot harm. I am grateful to be in the 99.9%, and thank you for your time. We have a few minutes for a couple of questions or comments if anybody would like to say something. We have mics, as you know, or you can just ask.
Thank you. I'm in tears because I can kind of relate to your story. I'm like a 20-year plus cancer survivor, and I look fine, but I'm not. So the chemo has hit everything. And every time I do end up in the hospital, or heart problems and tumor problems with my thyroid, etc., the last 10 years, I feel like I'm in the struggle to stay alive. And so when I get stuck going in, I'm like fearful that I won't come out. And I'm an old peds ICU neonatal nurse all the way back from 1983. And I was never afraid to stand up, and I would be in doctors' faces. And I fought for my patients, and I don't know what's happening. I don't know if people don't care, if they've become what years ago we called the refrigerator nurse or the stove nurse, that they just came to work for an appliance, to buy an appliance to get a paycheck. And I don't understand what's happened to passion and to be advocates for our patients. But when I get sick, I am scared to death that I won't see my kids. I'm afraid I won't get out. And I always say, I never wanted to be a nursing teacher. I wanted to be a nurse practitioner. But I got cancer in the middle of everything. And God put me where I am now, and I've been teaching for the last 18 years, and I love what I do. And I always say, if last year I taught 176 students. If I can plant 10 seeds and make them little Ellens, then they can take those 10 seeds forward, and hopefully I'm making a difference in saving patients.
Thank you for using your story to make a difference, yes. And that fear is real. And so I'm sorry for your journey, but keep persevering and calling for excellence.
I wanted to thank you for telling your story and for giving me the courage to do what I'm going to share now, and that's to just share one of the things that I've noticed that I was afraid to mention publicly because I didn't know whether it was appropriate for this. This is my first time attending QSEn. I came to the work that I've been doing for the past 7 or 8 years in part thanks to the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And I was very impressed with team steps and the resources that are available, and that's something that's kept me going in a bunch of ways. The President's proposal for the budget includes the elimination of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. Right. And my feeling about these things is that we need to notice and act as nurses, because everybody has different political views, and people should be encouraged to express their views, whatever they are. There may be some reasons that I'm not aware of that it would be good to get rid of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, but I believe that it should continue to exist because that has been a good, reliable source for important information that I think has contributed to saving lives, and making our healthcare system more safe. And finally, along those lines, the Affordable Care Act is not Obamacare, it is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. And I am outraged and frightened about what it means that patient protection is being taken away from our country. So that's what I needed to share. Thank you.
Thank you for your courage to say that, and it does bring out that we don't only need to notice in clinical settings, but we need to notice what is happening around to equip us to better care for our patients, and you gave an eloquent example of that. I'm afraid that we're out of time so that we can hear our next speaker who's going to be awesome, but thank you very much for your time, and I am grateful to be here, and I hope that you take your stories and your things to make a difference in the way that you teach. Thank you.